There is an all-out war on personal freedom and safety. No matter how rich, how smart, how experienced you are, the wrong or incomplete way to seek freedom from the matrix can actually lead us to more enslavement in the current breakdown of society, not the real get your family to safety and develop the way of life we're dreaming about and we seek to make happen. This is why I'm opening a totally new window of opportunities for us on my Telegram channel. Many of you may already know. It's called Winds of Change, precisely because we know that society is breaking up, people are waking up, and winds of change are rising to find a new way of life. This window of opportunity comes in the form of bi-weekly live streams and stems from my realizing how time-consuming it was today to try and collect a well-balanced view of everything that's happening around us, not just the recent pandemic or the increasing conflicts or supply shortages and yes, you get it, the list is quasi-endless, reading deep in our identity as humans, what we are and what life we really want to pretend to is worth living right now on this dreamlike realm. Many people have come and have asked my opinion about such subjects, knowing that I've been involved all my life with those existential questions. In fact, it's what matters, not just digging the questions, but all very much pushing relentlessly for answers. Because in all those discussions, people are spending their time telling you what's wrong. Right, I think most of us got it. Things are wrong. But what people are not telling you is what you can do about it. And that's what's missing. And that's what we're going to be addressing during those meetings and our talks together. It's looking for answers which are tangible, which are applicable, which are realizable to truly change the life we accept and we want to live. In short, those live streams are my current answer to a lot of repeated questions as I find more and more connections and, more importantly, as we develop more concrete answers. Under the form of programs to gather the lost knowledge and the missing education in basic life skills, we don't have to spend all our time in seeking and never applying, because at the end of the day, it's all very well looking for problem. It's all very well looking for solutions. But if you're not going to be using them, then you might just as well stay in bed that day. And so we also have another form, which is a transition village, which is a concept that I developed on my website. And those live streams, as we are breaking down ground and starting to move from planning, because we understand the problems, because we're bringing solutions, and so we can start to plan. And then from planning, we move to executions. And we do that on both sides of the Atlantic. And I'll tell you more on the possibility to join either or both in the live streams and in the description below these videos. So there are 2 live streams per week, where we tackle the hot topics and find concrete solutions to the questions and issues they raise. In this particular video, I'm going to give you an idea of the type of topics I have prepared for us. And I say us because I selfishly benefit immensely from my research for the streams. And it ranged from what appears to be new issues to demonstrating how the threads of those hot topics actually run deep in the deception we are under for centuries, if not millenniums. And of course, as I keep mentioning, because this is the major difference with a lot of excellent channels you can still find on uncensored platforms, I do not only dig the questions, the historical threads leading to it, the entities involved, but I am really about bringing in ideas for how we can start to deal with it and make a real change here, now, in our lives. So let's begin, shall we? What's really going on in the world today? As we advance in unraveling the subjects I will cover to give you a solid foundation for understanding, analysis, and actions, we will constantly come across the notion of great reset, let's just say at the moment that it is a moment in time where what preceded that time is erased. So removed from view and even from the consciousness, from our consciousness, and it is accompanied, or shall we say, triggered by large cataclysmic or cathartic events which totally consume the attention of the people living at the time. That within an incredible period, really, really short period of time, the previous ways of life is erased from their working memory, and the new paradigm is anchored by a series of consolidating events. Think, for example, of what happens when there are natural catastrophes that would create gigantic mudslides. And by the way, they start to explain to me the perplexing architectural details where whole stories are literally half buried under the current street levels in remaining beautiful buildings in towns across the world. And what I mean by this is when you look at buildings from previous centuries and you see that there are windows which are really in the wrong place, they're at the level of the street or of the road, or sometimes even a little bit below that. So what happened? People didn't build windows in the road. So something must have happened, but we don't speak about it. And it's really interesting to start digging into this idea. So we will see that there is a tremendous impact on the way we conceive history, or rather, how we are told what is supposed to be our history, and how conflicting events or remnants of bygone events is still removed today or presented as unresolved mysteries. Let's think about all those buildings, whether they are pyramids or absolutely marvelous buildings supposedly built at a time where people could hardly do anything else than walking in the streets. And how did they build all these cathedrals? With bamboo? Well, perhaps they did in China, but there was something behind. And we are, I think, not really asking enough questions about this. Well, the good news is they have a significance. These buildings, they are the witness to what we have not yet dug into. And above all, this witness from bygone eras, as we're told, did not happen at the very core of it. Well, the good news is they have a significance. They are witness to what we've not dug into. And above all, these are witness of bygone eras where people knew things that we have forgotten. And there are still people on the planet who do know these things. I like to call them geniuses, and I like to bring them together under what I call the genius fellowships. And because there are people who still remember or have found again how these specific events took place, we know that we have solutions for today which are not open to the general public. Indeed, we realize that solutions existed. Let's think about all the water, bringing water to the desert, or how we could refrigerate foods, as for example in Iran, where they have these gigantic fridges, or what we would call a fridge today, which were way before we had any ideas about electricity. So there are a lot of methods which can be found across the world and are no longer in use and are replaced by absolutely stupid technology which bind us to an external framework that we can revive. And this is what I mean by looking for solutions which already existed and can be reutilized today. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. If you cannot wait to see what I'm speaking about, join the live streams below in the description and reopen your ability to conceive of a reality which is not bound by current strangulating worldviews. Check at Genius Fellowship on my website at the end of this presentation as well. So what's happening in the world today? Then there is common denominators. And it has much deeper roots than the official confused narrative of a bat landing on the head of a senior Chinese researcher, and yet forms a common denominator of multiplying the urge of a lot of conflicting information, fed by a plethora of media sources, truth seekers, and controlled opposition. The more numerous the subject, then the easier it is to feed apparently prepared masses to swing haplessly from one polarization to another. And since there is, in the majority of cases, little opportunities to check those very sources, then there is decreased confusion and loss of attention. In the live stream, we are going to look at how the structures of those constant fear flags are constructed. It's not happening haphazardly, but it's a fruit of carefully crafted situations which were expounded and planned decades ago. In fact, I will even show you where and how, as well as where you can find the proof of it for yourself. And it's in the open public view. Pandemic, wars, food shortages call on the most powerful emotional instincts we have that can trigger enormous amounts of stress and fear. And lo and behold, we have them all in today's situations, leading us to want to find protection and triggering a lot of social unrest, which we see spreading across the world. Since people are entertained with constant episodes of each, pandemics, now vax outcomes, variants, and whatever can cause alarm in the health spheres, wars, the baddies are hating the innocents, and material and food shortages, there is a careful machination which is reaching greater summon and of nonsense and total confusion every day, with the result that people have no more bandwidth to concentrate on real root causes. They feel more and more distressed, and they feel more and more insecure, and they totally lose the ability to recreate a vision of a sane and balanced world where we can finally go about healing the planet and ourselves from all this madness. Does this remind you of how I initially explained the Great Reset? A time where the intensity of the situation are so great that it produces a cathartic reaction, just like what we're seeing today. I will show you how much of our previous so-called lifestyle we have already agreed to give up and are still about to let go of, this time in the realm of perennial in the name of security and privacy. Live streams about China and other places are coming up. What are those common denominators? Well, there are a lot of conflicting information, and this is why I decided to create those live streams, so that we could examine them step by step, the subjects which we are all interested in, because it's part of our life. It touches us every day. It touches our family. We have a polarization of viewpoint, People believe wellness and see it, and people say no, not at all. And of course, the media is doing nothing but exacerbating with this situation. Did you also notice the loss of information on the net? Well, I started looking for things even in the short weeks preceding getting this presentation together. You're looking at some information and you remember that you could find more before that, and yet suddenly it's not available anymore. And you read that, for example, DuckDuckGo has agreed not to push through fake information. What on earth does it mean? Well, it means that basically everything that we had in our possession to make comparison and try to understand what it was all about is disappearing. It's like there's nothing left. Everything that I was looking for, even a few months ago, let alone a few years ago, has totally disappeared today. Something I'd like to point out, and I will have probably just a whole series on this. Few people who use Google every day are actually aware of how this company came about. How these college students who romantically put this great idea together, they're not actually the angels who unified the planet we'd like to think about. In the corresponding live streams, I will show you how Google came into being and what happened to it. First, growing into this wonderful connecting tool, which we didn't realize was going to become the only source of information. Think about all the copycat scenarios afterwards, like Wikipedia, for instance, and how it became corrupted even by the words of its own founders who felt compelled to leave it. So we are faced with a strangulation of information which is fallen into a few single hands, and people are either aware of it but still can't find the information, or they're totally unaware of it and they're totally brainwashed. There is once again a huge consequence for our everyday life. Once everything we're exposed to has the same fabricated flavor and removes all other information we could have access to, letting us discover other facets to the one story left for us to consume. We'll look at how the big other social medias streams have locked this information away. They suppress the free speech, even though Elon Musk might have bought some part of Twitter today. I don't know how much this is controlled information or not, we'll have to see. And they're destroying the ability of people to talk with each other in a civilized manner. Why? Because there is an immediate polarization which is pushed through. In those episodes, I will take you down the repeats of history, with the destructions, for instance, of the Great Library of Alexandria, or more recently, the spontaneous combustions of museums and libraries around the world. And for those of you who don't know the story of Alexandria, it was supposed to be the place where all the knowledge from antiquity was kept, and then suddenly it burst into flame and disappeared and fell down into the Mediterranean. And with it, all the knowledge about previous civilizations. How useful. We'll foray into the history of architectural marvels of the world and the explanations which are now hidden from most of us as to their meaning, their constructions, and their function. And yet again, I will weave for you the positive outcome and use we can make from realizing the actual history behind the rise and fall of those buildings, by not only uncovering their initial function, but by using that knowledge again today to create alternatives we can use in our transition villages to escape the stronghold of current energetic or life-preserving options we are reduced to. We know that there are scientists, we know that there are engineers, self-taught, highly ingenious individuals or academics thrown out of the mainstream universities, research centers, funding and lab facilities, whose patents have been exploited or hidden or stolen even, and who simply have not got the ability to move from theoretical understanding to perhaps working models, but never have the ability to share their rediscovery with a large number of people. And we come back to my visions of genius fellowship, because those gifted individuals need to be supported initially by a few genuine mecenas, and then by communities who will interact with them, because they're going to do things for us. They're going to do things for the people like they should be doing in the first place, but are being prevented from doing so. The buildings, the constructions I described a short while ago, are keys to a much wider understanding of the world we think we live in, much greater possibilities to access levels of autonomy, of integration, of harmony, of comfort, which we can't even bend our heads around today. And all we need to do is, once again, to connect the dots. So that brings us to this point. We should be asking ourselves, who actually decide what's true? And what's under which circumstances are people deciding what is true and what is fake? Who are those self-appointed fact-checkers? What are their connections with the very ideologies they promote or destroy? How did we, Homo sapiens, presumed sapiens, end up getting rolled over in such blatant abuse of power, of deceit, and social engineering? This, in fact, becomes other live streams, where we examine the whole construct behind orchestrating the desensitizations of a whole generations, through education, through food, through environment, through reaching us in all ways of life. And this is reaching epic proportions in recent decades. Those who exert power over our thoughts, because we let them, are the very same people who employ happy idiots to pretend controlling the information we have access to. So the conflict of interest are prominent, that even the mainstream media has to mention it from time to time. In order to unravel those conflicts of interest strangling our daily lives, we will be looking during the live stream where the real power is located. It's clearly not in the democratic institution we're supposed to live under, who really hold the power both locally and perhaps more internationally, planet-wise, or maybe even beyond. We need to find out. I will show you how the media are owned and interconnected, where they get finance from, and who they have to cover and ignore. The same goes for healthcare. I will discuss later health and medicine, but here we need to be thinking of the whole role of so-called doctors and how healthcare is being planned has become monopolistic, that it is even easier to destroy in one foul swoop. If all possibility of getting medical attention is held by a few, just imagine how easy it is to control the narrative, the procedures, and ultimately, as we've seen recently, even the access to whatever healthcare we already have agreed to be submitted to. Think about access to hospital during that so-called pandemic. For this, I will make a stream dedicated to how doctors are educated, how hospitals are controlled, and what happened, taking the example of both France and the US, which are two places which I know pretty well, when the decision is taken to remove access to those single entries medical facilities when the people do not show proper credentials. I mean, do we need now to have credentials to be sick? This is totally insane. Hence, in my planning of transition villages, we will always include a medical house as well as a medical lab facilities. We will never fall back onto the blackmail situation of conforming or no longer being treated. I have noted here, the same as food is concerned, how food production is slowly but surely being concentrated in the hands of the very few large plants. Think of thousands and thousands of milk cows in farms, or single crops that destroy everything around it. And who is now in control of those enterprises? Not to mention who owns the land. How is it all related to the monopoly of energy sources, where as there is nothing that should really prevent us from going back to previously known and extensively utilized sources of energy? And it is very difficult when we examine all those subjects to stay clear of politics and politicians, because there are interventions locally, nationally, and internationally. You probably are starting to realize the body of information we need to review and become excited at the idea that there is definitely a way to access the solution still showing in our environment, despite the great efforts at erasing every traces of them. All of this are subjects that we will be looking at twice a week by streams on my Telegram. It pays to pay attention, doesn't it? Since what happened is not even hidden. It's on public websites, it's on government websites, and when people are talking about conspiracy theory, it makes me laugh. Are governments also part of the conspiracy theory? Well, I believe so, but that's not what the mainstream narrative is all about. And a lot exists to actually warn and prepare us for those periods of great reset. It certainly pays to pay attention to a whole category of public knowledge, kept in plain sight of anyone who wishes to unravel the meanders of our current situations, how it came about, and what we can do actually to refuse the planned outcome. This knowledge is hidden in plain sight in the history of hidden societies or of societies and the gathering which were formed and or reformed at the beginning of the 20th centuries. Truth be told, they were not invented in the 1900s, but simply recalibrated after the preceding resets. We'll take time to review the most salient ones, such as Tavistock in Britain, or the offshoots created by the same people in the Fed, and we'll explore how the government that we take for public entities, supposed to serve the people that elect them, are nothing but, sit down, limited companies which today are all broke, and even more interestingly, they're all registered in fiscal paradise, as astonishingly as it may sound. This will make us explore the facet that many freedom seekers are trying to organize through sovereignty, not because I'm an expert on it, but because I want to show you how you can be active at different level of awareness and activity, and that we really have to choose carefully where we want to invest our attentions and efforts. From those societies, we'll slide to discover the recurring public figures who we know keep cropping up behind each society, each book, each talk, each agenda. People that we fear about today are straw material hiding the network of a few individuals that we refer to as a hidden government and or the dark government. And in any case is becoming familiar with the identity of those people. It means that you no longer will be kept hostages to the strategies used to keep us in perpetual fear and need. Because that's what they're using. They're using fear, and they're using the fact that we need them, or supposedly, because we accept their terms and conditions to start off with. But they are the same people. You will see that they are the real owners of our current mainstream medias, of our current food supplies, of our current medical assets, of our current banking and political systems, and so forth. There are publications. Everything has been written down or is being put into films. And it's even collated into agenda. You've heard about the Agenda 2020. Well, yes, we've just had it on the nose. 2023, 2026, 2030, and so on and so forth. We even have the self-appointed director of the World Economic Forum, the WEF, telling you in plain English what is planned for us and how this is going to happen. And lo and behold, this is precisely what we are being confronted with today. His book, by the way, is trending on Amazon. So should we pay attention, or should we choose to ignore what we see? Well, if we do choose to ignore what we see, what are the choices at the end of the day we really need to deal with consciously, because they profoundly impact our daily life and that of our family? These are considerations I will not only expound on the live stream, but use as basis to help you decide if you need to escape for yourself and your family, and if you need an escape plan. This understanding, it can lead you to very different analysis when you come to decide if you are safe where you are, or if you need to make any changes to where you live and what you do, and if so, when and what exactly. Because the better you can analyze the big picture without getting lost in rabbit holes the mainstream media want you to be put into, the more clarity you will have about the consequences of each one of your decisions or non-decision. It's worth taking the time to confront them whilst we can. I mentioned this part earlier, simply because the discovery we make concerning Big Pharma are simply astonishing and endless. Even if you happen, like me, to have been interested in the activities of those big concerns where the boundaries between healing, wars, and power are extremely tenuous and certainly incredibly connected. Because of their structure and ownership, we get back to the influential individual civil society I mentioned a couple of slides ago. Strange, right? To always come back to the same family line, to the same names, same which travel through the Middle Ages and are still extant and powerful today. And this may account for the equally astonishing contracts those big pharma companies have gotten away with us as recently as this crisis, with the signature of hidden terms of contracts exonerating them from any liabilities in the administration of those experimental drug substances. The only way one can get labeled as conspirationist would be not to utilize public domain information, which is granted more and more difficult to access, but by no means impossible. So just extremely time consuming, and thus it means that having somebody like me who is doing it for you and presenting you with a result should really be noteworthy. Among the developments which caught my attentions are really some specific, well recognizable timelines. That is to say, you can find an interview, you can find a book, you can find a film, you can find an event where what is happening today is clearly forecast. There is in actual fact nothing more in the now than the whole mafia of Hollywood, which sucks unsuspecting and trusting individuals into its destructive vortex. I'm not even sure I will want to go down that rabbit hole, but let's think or hint towards the recent scandals with real sex and pedophilia cases, where all the power of mainstream media is engaged to cover up. Let's say that Weinberg was an easy scapegoat for far greater happenings, barely hidden in portable computers that no one's want to touch at the moment. And I think everybody knows what I am talking about. So in these streams, however, I will show you the connections between usual suspects no one bothers to investigate. I mean, frontmen like Fauci and Gates, which are obviously frontmen, deep shitholes like the WHO, with its colorfully tainted president, fully paid by the Gates Foundation, or the famous WEF that I mentioned on a couple of occasions. I will also take you down the threads which bring us back always and continuously to China. China is the alpha and the omega of all the storage we have. And who is in the Wuhan? Who came to Wuhan? Who organized what we are? Who organized what at every turn we see is a spectacular problem? It's only coming from China. Whether it is in the house or whether it is not, it's all kind of things. We are coming across China, and I will draw your attention to what's happening today. In Shanghai, for example. Who knows that there's 26 million people literally under the worst lockdown ever invented in the known history of mankind? And then we're going to be looking at what we call the West. What's happening to the Western civilization? What is it supposed to be? What's supposed to be happening? And of course, we're going to come towards a brewing conflict which have been marring the 21st century. Very much as it has done, or perhaps even more than it has done previously. What are those conflicts? What are they happening? Where are they happening? Who is behind them? And how are they affecting us? Really affecting us on a day-to-day basis, despite the fact that we are seeing there, thinking that they are far away. They're the very cornerstone of what we're experiencing today. China, and perhaps the special reason, the entities behind China, but this is really a different level of analysis, which requires a solid understanding of the visible wills of power today holding us in the seemingly unsuspectable mess. So then I will also take you in some of the live streams behind the history of the vaccine manufacturers. We touched on it briefly in the previous slides, but I will be talking to you about what and who is Pfizer, who is Moderna, how it miraculously appeared literally a month before this COVID thing happened. And yet, Moderna, who had never produced anything, suddenly produced one of the most important so-called vaccine of our time, which has never been tested by anybody, but is applied to millions and millions of people. We're going to be talking about people with a much greater history behind them, like Johnston. And I will show you how Johnston has been at the core of incredible scandals, not only in the US, but pretty much worldwide. And then we'll be talking about what I call all the others, because under all the others are definitely private enterprises which could have given different solutions, but which have never been allowed to move forward. So here I would like to lighten up a little bit, because Richard Barr, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which you may or may not have read. If you haven't, please go and find it. It's a beautiful story. Had this quote, which I found very pertinent: to bring anything into your life, imagine it's already there. And we see it working for the positive when you are pacing forward an event that you would like to see happening. You may be going to meet up a friend, you may be creating a business, you may be moving someplace. But it also happens, unfortunately, with people who are pacing forward events which are not in our advantage. And the problem is that they seem to be following through much better than we do. So we need to really kind of get up to speed and remember, what is it that you want to bring in your life? And what is it that you're going to be imagining is already there? Because that's what's going to happen. And this is part of some of the programs that I create. For example, Let's Rethink Life or Plan Your Escape, both of which are helping you to decide on different ways in which you may want to lead your life. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So let's carry on what's going to happen in the live stream. So we are going to be talking about health and medicine today, because there could be a great deal of difference between achieving health and utilizing medicine. So what is it that we call health? What is a medicine of today, and how is it affecting us on a daily basis? For example, how good is modern medicine for us? You know, we tend to be running off to the doctor every time we've got a scratch on the nose, but how good is it really for us? Because we could be asking ourselves much better questions than what we are doing at the moment. For example, we have forgotten that barely a century ago, there was a huge scandal. There's no other way of saying that, between two protagonists. One was called Beckham, and the other one was Pasteur. So I think you know who won. I don't think you even have heard about Beckham. And actually, he was the one who made all the discoveries that Pasteur put under his name, but he also predicted that the way things were going, modern medicine was not going to be helpful for us. And we will be looking at what was he actually saying, what happened between the two. Both of them were French scientists. One was the right one was a genuine one, Bechamp, and the other one was kept his name in posterity, but not for those who know what he did. And then we are going to be talking about what's happening to modern medicine. In other words, we have a trend towards specialization. You have people who can be looking at your finger without knowing how your arm is going, or people who could be looking at your nose without looking at your lungs. We could be having people looking at a specific articulations, so maybe a kneecap without understanding how your spine is going. So it looks like we are becoming bits of body, and we have lost the concept of the whole body. But even worse than that, can you treat the body without thinking about the mind? And can you treat the mind without thinking about the body? Because it just seems to me that one is totally impossibly connected with the other, and yet we act as if they were two different things, like two different us. And of course it creates issues. And then we have to talk about health and the environment. Certainly the environment most of us live in is not getting any better, and it has an effect on health at lots of different levels. So in the live streams we will be looking at how is the environment really affecting our health, and what are the correspondence and what we can actually do about it. And then finally, also within the medicine live streams, I will be talking with you about the future of medicine. How is our modern medicine going, or already ending up, because we see what's happening, and what are the alternatives that we should be inquiring about, not necessarily going for immediately, but I think we should be aware that there are other ways to do things than the ones that we are currently using. So, the thoughts manifest as a word. The word manifests as a deed. The deed develops into a habit, and the habit hardens into character. This was brought to you by the Buddha. A few years ago, I became interested in geological ages. And this came to me because of, probably a few of you heard about this, there was a lot of talk about the Anthropocene. Anthropocene means the age at which humans have so profoundly affected their environment that it became visible geologically. In other words, normally geologists look at things over hundreds and thousands or millions of years or hundreds of millions of years, but within the space of less than a century, man has sufficiently transformed the geological terrain of the earth so as to produce an era which has been called the Anthropocene. And I will tell you the stories of how this word came about and what one is trying to replace it with. What comes next? Well, it's really interesting, because when I was looking at the Anthropocene some years back, there were some suggestions about what was coming next. And this coming next obviously had to do with transhumanism and AI, and what would be the benefits and the drawbacks of this. And today, when I started to look it up to put this presentation together, I realized that Google had reorganized the future age into a symbiosis. In other words, it's looking at people getting together to make the environment better. And quite obviously, it is linked to the Great Reset. And I will give you some information upon which you can make your own mind as to how all this is being put together. Because there is this word that I keep repeating, which is great resets. And we'll be looking at what is a reset also within the live streams. And it's not like it's just happened. It's been happening throughout history. The last one were supposed to be around the 1860s or thereabouts. And it has profound, incredibly profound repercussions on both the known history and the history which is very often hidden away from us. So the Anthropocene, well, I've picked up a picture which really was disgusting, But this is really what the outcome of it is. We see it everywhere. It has terrible consequences for the whole planet. The consequences are within pollution, of course, the pollution of the soil, and it's not only pollution as far as the soil is concerned, but an incredibly pauperization of the soil. The soil is getting dead. And whether we have wars, whether we have peace, unfortunately, unless we revitalize the soil, it has only got not even a dozen years in front of it where it is capable at the rate and in the way in which it's been utilized to do anything for us. And then we have the air. So let's not talk about pollution. Now the air is getting even more polluted because when we put these nappies on our faces, which are full of plastic, then we are starting to discover that there are actual plastic particles in the lungs. And this is so significant because you cannot remove anything from the lungs, not with what is known today. So the air pollution goes as close as possible as our, vital ability, our ability to remain alive and to be healthy. So to this, we obviously have to add water. So the water is both polluted and it is getting rationed in ways which are not necessary. And I will explain to you what scientists, true scientists, are saying about water, how it can be managed, how it's been wasted. Let's think about, let's try California and all the way in which the rivers are. The Colorado River, for example, is being totally dried up to irrigate huge farms in ways which are simply insane, and then are leading to parts of the forest fires that we're seeing, although it's not just the lack of water. And of course there is all the pollution of water, because there is no water left which hasn't got plastic in it. If you think about the oceans, if you think about rivers, we have created such a mess in the Anthropocene, which is, thought to have started around the 1930s, 40s. So it's barely a century old, and we've still managed to completely fuck the planet up. Bravo, human beings, So we'll be talking about water, and may I just remind you that our own physical bodies are made principally of water. Then to all these ills and dire circumstances, we have to ask to add EMF, which are electromagnetic frequencies. And this is the hidden weapon of choice. Because on the one hand, we are becoming more and more attracted and totally addicted to all kinds of apparatus without which we think we cannot live. Although quite recently, even in my lifetime, and I'm not a century old yet, we were quite capable of getting from A to B without a Google map, or we were able to communicate without having this appendage of the cell phone on our ears. We were able to go to concert and listen to things live, and television was barely, when I was a kid, it was a big thing to have a TV still, but today most people couldn't possibly live without it. So forget about all the other instruments that we use on a daily basis and which require more and more interference by electromagnetic frequency. And I think that most of us don't actually understand the extent of the damages that EMF is causing both to ourselves and to the environment, which is the flora and fauna to which we are totally and utterly dependent. And then we talk about food, of course, because all the food that we are eating, bar a few of us who are lucky enough to still grow their own food and be responsible for it, the food that you are consuming in supermarkets or even in your local shops is profoundly poisoned and profoundly dead. So when you eat dead food, it doesn't do you an awful lot of good. So these are the things that I'm going to be talking about because, as I mentioned, it has an effect not only on ourselves but on our environment. And what does environment means? Well, it's not only the geological environment, but it's also the living environment. So we will be talking about the incredible depletion of flora and fauna that I have witnessed in the course of my life. I'm a herbalist. And even 40 years ago, I was using a huge amount of medicinal herbs, which I cannot find anymore. They have just simply disappeared. And the same goes, I will, check out before our live streams, the rate of disappearance of the fauna. We know that so many species are being eradicated every single day on the planet through the effect of what we're doing, mostly unconsciously, but we're still doing it. And the purpose of these live streams is to bring this information back in front of us so we can decide what we want to do with it. Are we going to use it or are we going to ignore it? Because how is all this affecting us? It has an effect. It's not because we are stuck in front of the television or we are listening to friends on Facebook or censored Twitter that it doesn't have an effect on us. It affects us profoundly mentally, physically, psychologically. It affects the way we are able to live, we are able to be happy, to find a meaning to our life. So it has an effect, and we'll be having some live streams where we will be looking at exactly how this is happening and what, again, we want to do about this individually and collectively. So let's talk education, because many of us have children or grandchildren, and this is really where everything started to go a little bit pear-shaped. In the 18th century, there were defining moments. The first one was when we started to take children away from family, to put them into schools. And the purpose of schools, and I'll refer back to the slides that I mentioned earlier about societies. The purpose of schools has never been to educate people so that they could make something wonderful with their lives. The purpose of schools from day one, by the people who created the schools, was to make sure that we were going to create good citizens. And there are so many quotes from very well-known people who are effectively telling you that the point of sending your children to school is to make good citizens out of them. But wait a moment. Is school and knowledge to become a good citizen? Or is school and knowledge and the acquisition of analytic abilities not rather so that we can create a more beautiful and more bountiful life? And so when we are as children being dragged into circumstances from the outside to sitting I don't know how many hours per day, going into school buses, having curriculums which make zero sense apart from confusing people from day one, let alone having those poor little mites having nappies around their noses so they can't breathe for 2 years or more. Whereas medically speaking, this is not a conspiracy theory, it is correct. Medically speaking, it made zero sense. So when we have children who are started off in this way, are we really surprised that young adults have no idea anymore what they want to do with their lives? They're looking for a career. They're not looking to live. The moment they get into higher education, they know they will have such debts on their shoulders that it will take them 10, 15, 20 or more years to get rid of it. Is it really surprising that young adults do not find any any sense, any meanings. They turn to all kinds of addictions to try and justify their existence, or simply we see with an awful lot of scare, as far as I'm concerned, an awful lot of young adults who decide that they do not want to live anymore. And we are seeing an increase in really bad outcomes which have not been dealt with. And so we end up with adults, we are the people who let all this happen. We know that knowledge is power, yet we do very little to even keep ourselves abreast of what is going on. We don't know. We just hear what they say on TV or what the newspaper is saying or how people are arguing. But how much of the homework are we doing to find out who is actually telling us the truth, who is withholding information? And this is why, once again, I'm taking the trouble to create those live streams, because not every one of us has the background or the time or the energy or the interest to go and do this research. But I think it is a good idea that we really spend some time listening, researching, and finding solutions that we think or we thought were not happening. So what results after 27 months of flattening the curve? We were supposed to be, kind of a week, 2 weeks into flattening of that curve, and then everything would be hunky-dory. I don't think that what we are told, or what we were told, and what happens is really what's going on. So we have the right to know what happened, what is going on today, how are we going to get ourselves from that terrible mess, and more precisely, where is it leading us? Because under the pretext of sanitary conditions, our lives are being turned upside down. We can't travel, we can't do what we want, we have to be injected with substances that we probably don't necessarily agree with. If we agree with it, perfect, but if we don't agree with it, then we shouldn't be condemned to a life of destitution by refusing them, specifically when they've not been proven, or they are getting proven to have such an amount of side effect that, well, maybe it was right to ask ourselves questions. And then comes all the questions, all the live streams about the land. Who owns the land? Because everything starts with food. Revolution starts when people don't have anything to eat, even if they don't understand what happened before, what led them there. When there is nothing else to eat, then obviously people are going to get up and start revolting. And so we have to turn towards what's happened to the ownership of land, which has been moved from smaller estates to larger and larger farms, and now are being concentrated in the hands of the few. For example, we get back to that famous Bill Gates, who has become the biggest landowner in America and is eating up land all over the world. We're looking again, at China, which is getting land all over the world as well, under all kinds of pretexts. So whether we're in Africa or whether we are in Asia itself, the ownership of the land is really something that we should be worrying about, because that's where our food is coming from. The next question we should ask is, who owns information? Because in those live streams, we're going to be watching what's been said against what's not been said. And what's been said is held by a handful of people, those who own the medias. I'm referring back to a slide that we saw previously. And then we don't know, because there is no possibility to have alternative sources which are being repressed as fake news or conspirationist or whatever it is. But this really brings out a really deep question. Who owns information? It should be every one of us. It should be every one of us who should be able to go and find out, what is this, what is that, how did it happen, is it true, is it not true, what happens if it were not true? And we're no longer in that situation. For example, the fate of Europe is really, interestingly, incredibly worrying. There is no more democracy. The EU, the European Union, which is made of people who, on the one hand, are being elected by a handful of citizens who are worrying about it, but are being directed by people who are totally unelected. And they make decisions for every single one of us. And we never elected these people. We don't even know what they're doing. We didn't know which contract, for example, they underwrote on our behalf with the pharmaceutical companies. We don't know what they're doing in terms of energy with this conflict. We don't know what is the interest of people whose family is working for the pharmaceutical company or are working for the military to push further conflict at the door of Europe. So there are a lot of questions that we should ask ourselves. And I'm talking about Europe because I'm currently living here, but I'm moving across also on the other side of the pond where we find exactly the same problems. So we have some stark realizations to come by, and we have some real choices to take into account, because what we understand of the current situation and what we will understand once we have attended those live streams will make our possible analysis of our situations, of how safe we are, how safe our family is, not only today, but tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. And when we see at which speed the situation is changing, then quite obviously we have to be concerned. We can decide not to do something, but we have to decide consciously, not let it slip under the radar. So, again, should we be concerned with what happens around the world? I mean, when we talk about Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they are faraway countries, except if we're in the States, and of course Canada is a lot closer. But do we really know what's going on there? Unless we look at the non-news, we can see that people who are directing Canada and New Zealand belong, strangely enough, back to the WEF, the World Economic Forum, young leaders. They were part of that group of people who were meant to be, forward politicians, and they have achieved elements of power, and the same goes for Australia. And then suddenly those countries are under the strictest and the most democracy damaging results than we can think. So should we not be looking, because the same is happening now in the rest of the world? For example, the United States of America. We have in the States this enormous polarization, left and right, Democrats and Republicans. But this is all a smokescreen, because what really is going on underneath is the demolition of the Constitution that people have. And again, well, who is a leader in all this? Our friends in China. So how many of us actually know what's happening in China? I think not very many. I was very lucky when I was much younger to spend quite a bit of time in China. And the last time I was there was just before Tiananmen. And I vowed that I would never set foot there again because of that. And obviously the situation has not improved since. But one thing that one notices, even from the fringe, is that whatever happens in China first happens in the States, happens in Europe, happens in Australia, happens in New Zealand, happens in Britain, happens everywhere else around the world. So would it be really smart to have live streams looking at what actually is taking place in China, what has been the path from the history which first started in China to what we are living on a daily basis, again, so that we can take conscious decisions of what we want to do for our own family. Do we need to plan our escape? And if so, how and where to? Again, this is one of the programs that I am running afterwards, but you can see how I came to creating those programs, not to please myself, because I have taken my family twice out of situations, once coming out of France and now getting out of Europe into Latin America. So I understand that one has to look at what goes on, and it's not because something is okay today that it will be okay tomorrow. So we need to really, as responsible adults, of leaders of our own families, we need to have the right information at our fingertips and know what we will do if and when a certain red light line is being crossed. So in the next series of live streams, I want to talk to you about supply chains. There is a lot of talk about, oh, well, there is this missing and that missing because there is a conflict, and this conflict is bringing supply chains problems and so on and so forth. But those material supplies have been under an enormous amount of stress already for a while. And we are going to be looking at how it could all come about. It comes from a specific way of running the supply chains, which is done on a very tight rope. In other words, nothing is being produced until it's been sold. And so there is such a short time, such short turnaround time. It's supposed to be cutting costs, but the problem is when there is a situation with the production, then there is no more delivery because there's nothing to deliver. For example, I would invite you to look on the net, if it's not been suppressed already, the amount of ships waiting to come in and out of Shanghai to bring or take away production where China is a hub of our material supplies today. And how did we manage to do that? Right, so we are facing a silent and a hidden supply chain crisis which doesn't start from yesterday. There's a timeline of build-up, and we already knew that this was going to happen. For example, I think most of us will remember this ship which got stuck in the Suez Canal, which was called the Evergreen. Well, they gave it another name after that. But interesting. Let's go and dig a little bit in one of those live streams. Who did the Evergreen belong to? And what was it carrying? Because there are so many things that I don't really want to be talking about on this, in case some children are listening, but there are so many things which are incredibly disturbing in this story, and we need to think about. We have all the energy conundrums. For example, right now we've decided we're not going to buy anything out of Russia. Well, yes and no, because we are buying things out of Russia, whilst we're telling our population that we're not. The United States has never imported more oil from Russia than today. The same goes with France. We have never made such heavy exchanges with energy with Russia as today, where we're telling our population that Russia is a bad guy that we must avoid at all cost. So we have energy conundrums, and those energy conundrums is changing the shape and the power between the main actors on the world stage. So we had the United States as the prominent player, and now we have the United States versus a new bloc, which is the non-aligned United States countries, such as Russia and China, but not just. We are seeing an awful lot of movement, and this movement have very deep, profound repercussions on the way you're going to be putting food on the table of your family. So please join the live stream so that you can hear what the problem is and then make your own mind up. I'm not saying that I'm going to tell you the truth, nothing but the truth and the whole truth, because I don't necessarily know it, but I do understand where the problems are stemming from. And with your help and the help of experts that I'm consulting on each one of these live streams, then hopefully it will help you to have a much easier transition to the world that we're leaving behind, towards a world that, as the quote was saying earlier on, we need to be able to imagine. And then there is, again, the China build-up. There's a build-up in the way in which they are handling their population. There's a build-up in the way in which they had taken all the material supplies from the world in the last couple of years. Everything was imported into China. One wonders why, and now we're starting to see that all these conflicts are just making a situation which was already happening visible, but it's not just started because there is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The supply chains is also our food supplies, and there are so many things that we need to understand. For example, how do we manufacture a food supply crisis? Because this is exactly what's happening today. The world is more than capable of feeding itself. What it's not capable of doing is dealing with the devious ways in which food is being distributed across the world. And this doesn't date from today. That's why I'm talking about manufacturing a food supply. The answer is simple. Small is beautiful, and small is bountiful. It is perfectly, totally possible to feed a whole population with what we have today and without the big agricultural concerns that we're told are absolutely necessary to feed the world. So you're probably not going to be having things like all the stuff that we see on that picture, but you're going to have proper food, vegetables, medicines, and a way to deal with animal husbandry, which has nothing to do with what is happening today. And on top of it, the food supply, I spoke about it in a preceding slide, comes from the destruction of the soils. The quality of the available foods is going down. We know that. It's been poisoned and it's been totally engineered so that our bodies can't do anything with it. And there are, of course, we also manufacture conflicts to justify the shortages. May I remind you, for example, for the US, that farmers are being paid, sit down, to destroy their crops, to kill their animals, to not replant. Now, what do you think? When you destroy what you have and you don't regenerate, are you going to create a crisis? And the same goes for Europe. It's even easier because, as a matter of fact, many people were not realizing this, but Ukraine and Russia are the biggest exporter of grain and other facilities, for example, oil, in Europe. And of course, since now in Ukraine they are planting mines rather than wheat and barley, then guess what's going to happen this summer? There's not going to be anything to put on the plates of people in Europe. And the governments are already saying this. So we are going to be looking at how is this all being engineered, because this is not natural, and how health is being used to justify the shortages, and really that there is a simple solution that I will be talking about, and again, which I treat in Plan Your Escape and Let's Rethink Life, because it is part of what you're going to need to know in order to keep your family together. And I'm not even talking about the climate hoax. There are whole episodes that we are going to consecrate that we're going to be using for this climate story. So, Aldous Huxley, who is a really important person because he'd seen all this happening, told us if most of us remain ignorant of ourselves, it is because self-knowledge is painful and we prefer the pleasures of illusions. Right, but up to what time can we really drown ourselves in illusions? Maybe it's time that we sit down and really get together and listen to what's happening, because there are actually hidden technologies and know-how that is being withheld from us. Okay, there are times when history doesn't tie up in terms of what people were capable of doing in the past. You know, I hear a lot of my potential clients saying, well, you know, in actual fact, everything is fine. You go out in the street and everything is there still. It's totally normal. No, it's not. And what is even less is what history has, the way it's been told to us, has left us. You know, we are not going to go back under a rock if we do not carry on the way we are, destroying ourselves, because in history people were capable of doing much better than what we can, and we're getting back to the story of the Great Reset. And then we're going to be looking in these live streams also about the history of the industrial revolutions, because we know of the first, second, third, and so-called fourth revolution that we should be in, which is leading to the merging of the human spirit or the human being with the machine. So we become transhumanist. A lot of people didn't even know that word, but transhumanism means the fusing of AI, artificial intelligence, with the human genome. And guess what's been happening with the hijacking of the RNA and the DNA of human beings, where it's been murmured that whatever has been injected into people has the capacity to, and not only the capacity, but has been altering the RNA, which in turn is altering the DNA, so the very basic blueprint of humanity. So this has to be looked into. And there are solutions. There are solutions for the now, except that they've been hidden away from us, and we've not been asking the right questions. So when I say I am constructing villages, transition villages, which is part of the work that I've, dedicating the end of my life towards, I'm saying that we have people who are incredibly well versed into alternative solutions. So alternatives that it has nothing to do with the solar panels that you buy or your government is trying to flaunt to you, which is made in China. There are ways in which we have energy at our disposal, and this energy is free, and this is why a lot of people gotten rid of during the course of history, or been their work has been taken away. Think of Tesla, think of Tauberger, think of Wilhelm Reich, and this is only, the ones which are better known, because there is an enormous amount of other people. But there are solutions for the now. And during the live stream, I will mention them. Where you will find the most information about the solution for the now, whether you have your own estate, whether you want to move into one of our transition village. And I'm saying transition village because you cannot move from where you are today to a perfect other solution without going through transitions. We need transitions for our own minds. We need transition to learn how to use those technologies. And we need transition, of course, to improve them. So the way in which you're going to learn most of this part is going to be in the 3-day boot camp, which you can ask me about. It's a 3-day immersion boot camp, which is called, again, Winds of Change. And I call them Winds of Change because it's quite obvious, if you've been listening to me all that long, that we are moving into a different era, and we need to have backup for it. So I will be talking about this, during the live stream, and yeah, that's what I was saying, during the live streams. So How does it work? Well, twice a week, I'm going to be picking up one of the above subjects that we've just been mentioning. And I will be taking it apart through openly available information. Mainly everything that I'm going to be talking to you about is available on even government websites if one was going to take the trouble to go and find it. So I'm not inventing it, it's there. We will be reflecting on it and decide ourselves how we want it to affect our lives now and in the future. Because it's only you who is going to be deciding for your family. So we can finally take individual decisions actually to protect the safety of our families, but to protect them within an informed framework. So how does it work? Well, you've got 3 options to join the calls. You can either join them monthly, so every month you have 2 live streams per week. You can ask questions during the call, and you get discounts on my other programs, and that costs €47 per month. And when you think about the scope of what we are going to be discussing, I think that, I'm hoping that I can make all this happen within 2 live streams. And sometimes there will be spontaneous, meetings that you will be invited to. Or you can decide to join for 4 months. So you have 2 live streams per week. You've got Ask Me Anything during the call, and you can also suggest topics that I may not have thought about. And to say thank you for your trust in me, you will have 1 free consultation on that topic that I mentioned a couple of times of Plan Your Escape with me, which is worth €97. And the cost of this is €147 for 4 months. Or you can be even more crazy and trust me for a full year, because you realize that there is so much which needs to be, kind of going through. And the more time goes through, then of course the more we discover and the longer, it takes and to adjust everything. So for 12 months, you have everything that you have in the 4 months option. But I'm also inviting you to come as my guest for one of our 3 days immersion boot camps, which has a value of €2,997. So it's the fact that you understand that you need to do something, and that the effort is not just, like what you've been said, well, you can get everything in 4 days or in 2 months or in 6 weeks. It's just not going to happen like this. So to reward you, to honor your time and your trust, then I will offer you this participation in the next boot camp, whenever it is that you're going to be joining in the next one that we'll be holding. And the cost of that is ridiculously low, I think, which is $397 per year, considering that you're getting already 10 times as much in the participation of the camp. So at the end of this video, you will have the possibility to find the page where you can join us. I'm refusing to go through PayPal. I'm refusing to go through all the things that eat your money, because everything that I'm earning is going back in the creation of the villages and the creation of the programs. And so I want that contribution that we make go entirely for this purpose. So here we go. Further thoughts. There is going to be a lot of things which are not in this program, which will happen. And one thing that I would like to remind you is gratitude shines a light on our happiness within. When we realize that we are incredibly blessed, and I have discovered this through someone that I respect profoundly, who has been coaching me for the last few months, and who made me realize that I had forgotten about gratitude. And when it came back into my life, then a lot of things fell into place. So I'm inviting you to think about it and maybe to embrace it as well, because the happiness is already within you. You just have to let it shine through. Lastly, because we're talking about happiness, I will be offering you a little, we'll do that sometimes, maybe once every 2 or 3 months, we'll see according to, the times that we've got. I have a little program which is what are your happiness parameters? And basically it helps you to become clear what makes you feel happy and how you can also develop whatever vision you have to make sure that you fulfill those happiness parameters and you adjust them. And then corollary, there is something that you need to know for yourself and your family and your safety, all of you, is where is your red line? At which point are you going to say, this cannot go on, I have to do something, and here is what I need to do because I will have thought it through. So this is the best I can, the best advice I can give you, because this is the one that I apply for myself, my family, my client, my friends, and that I'm inviting you, and I will be inviting you throughout all those live streams to pursue as well. So now, well, there is only one thing to do. Join the live streams today. You'll see it on the next page or just below this video. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to unraveling all this with you and answering all your questions as much as I can. See you. Bye-bye.